Good afternoon and welcome to Crosstalk. It is a segment or an episode presented to the public today from the sanctuary of the Canaan Baptist Church of Christ. And it's during this particular presentation that we periodically bring guests to our program to discuss issues that are important to you. In recent weeks, we have had very spirited conversations about the election, pre-election as well as post-election, and we learned a great deal from our panel during that time. Today we have an awesome group of young people who are going to be talking to us about the church and the relationship of the church to other generations other than the traditional group that comes to church, but rather the young people, as we call them, the young adults, the millennials, and contrasting their commitment to the church to that of what we call ourselves, or what I'm referred to as a boomer. We apologize that we are coming on later than usual today. We did have some technical difficulties that we have overcome, and we appreciate our staff for working hard to get us on the air. We want to say season's greetings to you during this time of year when the church recognizes and celebrates the birth of our Savior. And we pray that your holidays will be safe and that your life will be filled with prosperity and love. Before we get started, I want to introduce the members of our panel today. And we are delighted to have with us several people who have consented to be a part of our group. And among them, in fact, they each bring their own special background that I think will help our discussion today. Neil Dawson is a New York-based actor and master teaching artist. He also teaches young people the theater and serves as a mentor to high school students at the Eagle Academy for Young Men. Neil, thank you for being with us today. We're also delighted to have with us Ashley Sharpton. Ashley is the director of the National Action Network Youth Huddle, and she is also a part of social media manager for the National Action Network and the youngest daughter of the Reverend Al Sharpton. I want to add that she's also a disciple, as is Neil, of the Canaan Baptist Church of Christ. And Ashley, we thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us as well. Along with us, David Brown, who is a man about town. He's the fashion aficionado of the Canaan Baptist Church and has been for a very long time. But beyond that, Mr. Brown has worked along with National Action Network, and I've seen him involved in a lot of social issues. He is the founder, if you will, of our back to school program that we sponsor around in the early fall, preparing young people in our community to return to school with the necessary supplies they need. He is one of the founders of our single parent ministry, and they have done a tremendous work here at the church, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of wonderful information from David today. The Reverend Mr. Junior Dr. Travis Boyd. I say Junior Doctor because Travis is just a few steps away from completing his doctoral degree from Drew University. He's done undergraduate work at Virginia Union University down in Richmond and seminary work as well. He is one of our associate ministers here. But beyond that, Travis has been instrumental in helping us, our church, during this pandemic to be an active participant in helping our community deal with those kinds of effects of a pandemic. And as a result of his leadership, our church has been involved in a number of outreach ministries, including distribution of food, clothing. In fact, yesterday we had over 300 people come to our church to receive goods that they need. And it was really a proud moment for me as a pastor to see Reverend Boyd active along with his volunteer staff in doing so much in such a short period of time. Delighted to have Reverend Boyd with us. Last but not least is one of the favored sons of Dillard University down in New Orleans. Lord Means, Anthony Lord Means' family is a staple, if you will, of Canaan Baptist Church. His mom was one of the great missionaries here for a very long time. He and his wife are also very active here at Canaan, and Brother Means is also a candidate to become a deacon here at Canaan very soon. He is our current Dean of Youth, and all the more reason why it's important that he is here today. So Brother Means, we are delighted to have you with us today. Now, to our audience, here to introduce our subject and to deal with, kind of prepare you for what we're going to be discussing this afternoon. No doubt about it, as a pastor for nearly 40 years now, I have had, I think, the privilege of observing some of the paradigm shifts that have occurred in the church over a period of years. And during this particular, let's say in this third millennium, we have seen a transition in traditional churches unlike, I think, any other period in history. The fact is, the decline in church attendance, and I think that is something that is happening in all mainline denominations, Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, you name it, there is a decline. It has been researched, it has been documented, and of course the visuals give us clear indication that something very different is going on in traditional Christianity. So the decline in church attendance is in this country, and over the last few decades, in fact, I think it may even go back as early as toward the Vietnam era, as we sometimes refer to it, and it's been widely discussed and written about. It's discussed in congregations among pastors and church leaders because we're grasping for answers as to why and what we should do and can do to turn the clock back to receive and make welcome those who are part of that age demographic so that they can be active participants in the church. It's a huge concern. I have that concern, and I talk to pastors all the time, but it is documented. Duke University Divinity School and other religious seminaries have looked into this situation along with the Pew Foundation, and they've discovered that young people are leaving the church in droves, and they also have some comments, and we'll hear perhaps some of them today, as to what's going on in the minds and the hearts of our millennials. Young adults are being called the nuns. I didn't know if you were familiar with that term or not. And ask, what is your denomination or what is your affiliation? Many of them are saying, I'm a nun. I have no affiliation. I love God. I love the church. I love Christ and what Christ teaches, but I don't align my name with a religious institution. Now, this is something I discovered when I was in seminary and we were studying Generation X. And that X was representative. I don't want to be labeled anything. Stop labeling me a Baptist or a Methodist or whatever. So that's when I first came into contact with the nuns. But that's a term that is popularly used along with a book that is out now by sociologist Josh Packard, who in that book that is titled Church Refugees. They were active, but now kind of, if you think of a refugee camp, are out there still believing in God, but having sort of disassociated with the status quo. And these are those who have not lost their faith, but no longer attend church. They just don't attend. And making up a large percentage of these groups is the youngest generation transitioning from adolescence to adulthood, called Generation Z. which is a new term for me. So we've invited these panelists to help us explore why the younger generation is leaving the church. So as we've already introduced those who are present with us today, let's get down to the core issue, and I'm going to pose some very direct questions. We'll start with Neil and work our way around. Neil, well, let me start with you, Ashley, because I'm picking on you because you, like my children, you are a PK, a preacher's kid. And time won't permit me to get into the downside of what my children used to share with me about being labeled that way. You know, growing up, middle school, junior high, high school, that wasn't really considered a title that you wanted to be thought of with your peers. And they suffered from that. I don't know if that was your experience or not. But your PK, why is the younger generation, and I don't want to use the term leaving the church, because most of young people I talk to still have a faith, and it's a Christian faith, for example, but they are very much turned off by the activity, if you will, of a traditional church. And to some extent, there are congregations far more traditional than Canaan. I want to tell you that right now. But we are still pretty much in the mainstream. What happened that caused young people to start thinking differently about their relationship with a church or a congregation?
Well, I'm going to speak on my personal behalf and my experience with other young people at Canaan and other churches around the nation. First, I like what you said about young people are not leaving the church. I think some part of the narrative is wrong. There are young people still in the church, and a lot of people go around saying that it's completely empty, the church is only full of older people, and that's not true. There are some young people interested. There are the young people leading ministry. We can look around Canaan. This is an intergenerational leadership structure, and I feel like all aspects, all ages are welcome here to understand, to learn, and to minister, and it's always been in that tradition. But kind of what you said about Generation X, I think with Generation Z, there's a complete rebellion. There's a complete resistance to tradition, and I deal with Generation Z. I started Name Youth Huddle at National Action Network because of a similar problem. There weren't a lot of young people there, and that's a civil rights group that my father started in 1991. They turned 30 next year. And I was one of the young people there all my life, probably the same as churches, because my parents raised me up that way. But it's that certain age after like 16, 17, 18, when they start transitioning out, you think you're grown, you want to do other things, church is boring. But I feel like that's when the lack of interest starts. And there's if you're not rooted, or if there's not a connection pulling you back, or someone reaching out trying to see what's wrong or how life changes for you during that time, there becomes a distance. And it's normal. I don't want to beat that part up, because that's a normal part of life, transition. But I do feel like when you come back from college, or when you come back from whatever you're wandering in the world during that time or transition, there must be something in the church to come pull you back in. So sometimes if there's not a lane for young people to take, or if they feel things are cliquey or things are unwelcoming, they're going to reject it. Or they're going to name call and beat it up or label it, because we reject boxes. We don't like to be in a box. So we'll say, oh, that's old, or that's whack, or they don't even know what's going on because you feel rejected. And most of the time, it's just a communication issue. There's usually there's a little deeper digging that needs to go. And I think that's because of generational issues as far as parenting. Some people in the church, a lot of kids are raised by their grandparents, are taken in by guardians, and a lot of issues at home changes things. And I'm honestly speaking from personal experience. When I went to college, I went to Hampton University. I grew up at Canaan. I was here 6 days a week, literally, in every, from the usher board to dance ministry, mime, church school, grew up here. I love Canaan. It's a part of my foundation. But when I went to college, I got lost. And I turned to drinking and to marijuana and other things, distractions. And I feel like I needed Canaan. I needed somebody to pull me back in. When I came here, I came back, of course. It was here, everyone was here for me, but something in me was lost. And I don't think that you don't have enough time to go identify with a lost girl in the church. Mm-hmm. That's for deacons or whoever my mentors were here or whatever. But sometimes you don't have enough time for that. So I think that there is things in the church that we have to change. I don't know if that's directly with the youth department, but there needs to be more of a connection with the younger adults. There's a connection with the kids because that's always been that here. Church schools, but it's that part, the celestial choir, it was the same thing before when I was younger. You always see them leave. But I think it's because of lack of connection for that group of people in the church. And I think it's because of judgment. I think it's because of traditional ways. People can sometimes feel that the church is too, what's the word? Judgmental, rigid. And I'm not saying that things have to change or conform because churches in a certain kind of way, we are based on the principles of the Bible, and we follow the Lord's way. So you have to understand that. I'm not saying to change all that, but there's a way to relate and bring people back in and help them to deal with life instead of just putting them in a box and labeling that.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. And that's a wonderful segue for me to turn this next question to Brother Means, our Dean of Youth, which we've had a Dean of Youth in place for probably as long as you folks at Canaan can remember, but times over the years, things are different. We're dealing with a very different kind of young people or class of young people who do come to church. But Means, you sat here and you listened to Ashley, as did I. Let me make this statement. As a pastor, and I think this is a feeling that most pastors that I'm associated with have. You know, it really hurts us to see that young people are disgruntled. That's painful to me as a pastor. And I'm sure it's also painful to anyone whose assignment is to work with families as they work with their children and so on. I'd like to think that in the last year or so, by virtue of the fact that the four of you are sitting up here and we're doing this very, very non-traditional program, that we are trying to make strides to reconnect. But as Dean of Youth, what is your thinking about this?
Well, I'll just say this. I'm going to answer your question. I come with 25 years of youth development.
Okay.
So I have 25 years of working.
You have to hold your mic up. Right.
I have 25 years of working with young people in community, Harlem, helping youth connect to resources and opportunities and build their future and identify who they are. And when I became the dean here, coming from that background, my mindset was to incorporate all that we do in the professional world and transition that into the church. I think you spoke on a lot of good points. The traditions, you know, it takes time. I think specifically when you talk about a church like Canaan, which is rich in history, you have, you know, you talked about my mother being a member of this church. You have a tradition, a lot of older people coming here. And I think the important thing is to remember is that the people who are available in the church, everyone's coming in to rebuild their own lives. And they're at a place where, you know, it's like a critical stage for everyone who's in the church presently. Like everyone's looking at their own self, trying to determine for something better. And I think that, you know, I think everyone's saying the same thing. And I just think, but that's what it is. I think it's at some point, what has happened is everyone wants to, you know, come with an idea. You know, everyone has a great idea, but sometimes in the church, it's whose idea? that we're going to go to. And people are, you know, it's a beautiful thing because it's like, I make a joke. I say that the youth board meeting is like, it's like going, like a kitchen. People are arguing over, I want to make cake for the kids, and someone wants to make pie. You know, we should have cake for the kids, and someone's like, we should have pie. Well, cake and pie is both good, but someone is like, it must be cake. And someone is like, no, it must be pie. Yeah. You know, we can make cake and pie, but oftentimes I think because a lot of people we all are wanting to do great things, but it has to be my great thing. Right. And we have to learn to share because we're all at this stage of trying to examine ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's what church is all about.
Let me push you a little further on that, and then I'm going to go to David. If you were to offer not necessarily a solution, but an alternative approach that you believe would turn that whole issue around of my idea versus collective thinking, what would it be, just off the top of your head?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, when we, you know, I just say it requires a level of trust. You know, if we're working together, and we all offer ideas. You know, I've been married for 16 years, and you know, that relationship, like any other relationship, requires communication, and we have to listen. So I just think that if a person has a position, then that person or those groups should be allowed, with trust, to do what it is that they're trying to do.
Sure.
Everyone, it's just a lot of chiefs, you know, a lot of folks, you know, and sometimes we have to, you know, I know as a minister, you know, you have your scripture, and I'm not sure, but maybe there's someone who tells you, well, I don't know if that's what the people need to hear today. But at some point, like, it has to be where whoever, you know, that this is the way we're going to go with that. Mm-hmm. It has to be some trust and communication. I just think that a lot of times it's just trying to decide on who has reign, whose way is going to go.
And so then the victim becomes the very clientele you're trying to work with.
Exactly.
Because we can't work out our adult juvenile behavior. We're not in position to. Let me go to David Brown. David Brown. Now I'm skipping over Reverend Boyd because David Brown, I always get nervous when he gets a microphone in his hand. David is often called upon during our worship service to give the prayer on Youth Sundays. Very passionate prayer, very passionate, but a spirit of preaching sometimes comes over his spirit, and he begins to articulate a lot of these concerns he has about a perceived desire to restrain. Help me if I'm getting off course. That there is a desire within the congregation to restrain the growth and development of young people. And he'll tell us, Lord, help us to stop holding these young people back and let them, have new ideas. And we have to, he articulates that. So David, this is why you're here. This is what we're talking about. You've heard a couple of perspectives here. So in your mind, first of all, let me ask you this, just so I can feel better and some of the rest of us can feel better. Do you think we are heading in the right direction to try to address the issue of the need, and I want to call it a need, the need of all people, including Generation Z, X, Millennial, all of us need God. And the mission of the church is to invite all humanity to receive the love of God. Now the approach, is sort of what Dean Means was talking about, I think can repel a little bit. But in your mind, do you think we are progressing, or do you think we have a long way to go, and do you have some notions about how we might take the new road?
Being that pastor, you set forth this platform.
Yes.
I think this is a start of growth. Canaan, to me, I mean, like Ashley said, I love Canaan too. That's why I'm here. I made a vow to God, that I was in different situations. So when I came out of a group home, I made a vow to God that I would come to church. Actively, this is what kept me here when I came to Canaan. Because when I came to Canaan, I came straight out of a different kind of atmosphere. So, as you said, I think it's a step forward, but it's also a step backwards. Why it's a step forward is because Canaan is a structured church. It's a protocol. You have a platform. You have a program. You know what you do. It's an offering. But what takes the youth back is you got a lot of people that's been here since 60s, 70s, you know what I'm saying? And they tend to forget what they used to do back in the day. Don't get me wrong. Nobody's perfect. Everybody comes to church for, let me think of the right word, restoration. You come to church to get revived, you know what I'm saying? But you have the older people who, instead of talking to you to the side, pull you to the side, have a problem, you smell like liquor on your breath. Let me take you to the bathroom. Let me get you a mint. You know what I'm saying? You don't go to the club and then come right to church. You know what I'm saying? Go home, freshen up. They don't do that. They'll talk about you. How about you help me? Because how about you was 18, 19 at one time too, and those same things you used to do. So my thing is, how do you forget what you used to do, but you're going to get on me for what I have done? So how can we move along with that? I think we need to lift each other up, because all young people, as Ashley said, doesn't have the right connection. All young people do not have somebody to tell them, do this, do that. I have all people to keep me on a straight and narrow path. So everybody doesn't have that. So it's better if you know your youth and your attraction of who your audience is. You know what I'm saying? Help somebody out, talk to them, put them to the side, big brother, sister program like that. Don't talk about somebody. So that's the problem I see, and I've been seeing it, and I see it now. Help me. Don't talk about me. Okay. So if you think I'm doing something wrong, I need you to help me so we can build together. Let me look at you for what you didn't used to do, and you can look at that, and I can feed off of you. We can feed off each other, communication and helping me out. So that's how I look at it.
Okay, David, let me ask you this as a follow-up. Do you think that what older church members might see as rebellion really should be interpreted as a young person's way of asking for help, as you noted about help me to find the path?
Yes, I think so.
Get on the path.
A lot of youth is that word PRIDE is pride. A lot of kids, a lot of men don't want to say they need help. I'm speaking for a man right now. Don't want to say they need help. Females are maybe a little different, so you have to go at things differently. So some people is afraid to ask for help. Some people don't know how to tap in and say I need help.
Yeah.
Some people don't know to go to, because all pastors don't have this platform like we have here with youth on the platform speaking about how we can get to bring a church together and how can we move forward. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of pastors, I could be wrong, don't engage with their youth like that. I'm not saying all, I'm just saying some of them don't even know their youth name.
Right.
But for you to, you know what I'm saying? So like you said, this is a step, but that's a setback that I have. That's one of the...
Yeah. I guess, and I'm going to come over to Neil, but I guess as a pastor, what's problematic for me sometimes, as it might be for you, is sometimes I don't know what to ask. I don't know where to begin, and it is a generational issue. It's not because I'm totally out of touch, but it is a generational issue that I have pastored 4 generations of people. So I've seen teens come into adulthood. I've married some of them and dedicated, baptized their children, and over 4 times. Started as a boy preacher doing it, like your dad. But as I'm 64 now, I have difficulty, this is more like a confession, of understanding what the issues are. So I have to re-educate to understand what the issues are, but I still have to proclaim, I'm obligated to proclaim the love of Jesus Christ. That's really what the church is about. And that's why I come to you, Neil. You're working, I'm thinking of your relationship with the boys at Eagle Academy, which is sort of an incubator, I think, if I'm wrong, help me with that, for young men to put them in a culture that will help sharpen their tools with the intent of their having a successful adult life, whether it be on the college or military or whatever it is that they decide to do. But when it comes to their religious way of expressing their religious beliefs or their belief in God or their attitudes of church, about the church, and I think, what are you, middle school primarily?
I work with middle school and high school.
Okay, so what are you hearing? What are you hearing in the field?
I actually had a conversation with I still call him my mentee. He's in college now, but I had a conversation with him last night about this, and I asked him what he thinks is the issue. What is that divide, that gap between young adults and older people? And one of the things he says to me is that some of the older people don't accept change. And I have to agree with that. He actually goes to church here in Harlem, not too far from here. And, with that said, there's a foundation. And, there are obviously things, rules, there are principles that are set in stone, which I completely agree with and I completely respect. I think the church needs to find nuance, and that's something that I think the church is lacking in general. They need to find different ways of, while keeping the foundation, they need to find different ways of telling the story. Yeah. And that could be, that could happen a number of ways. When we think of, I'd liken it to when we see movies about slavery, when we see 12 Years a Slave, when we see Amistad, Roots. A lot of people always say, we're seeing the same story, we're seeing the same story, we're seeing the same story. I think the catch is telling the story differently.
Yeah.
We hear all these stories about the Holocaust, about the Jewish injustices and stuff like that. They tell their stories differently, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why, for many of them, it resonates differently. And I think that's something that the church needs to do. I think history is very important to me. I think traditional is very important to me. When I was a kid, I couldn't stand singing them hymns. Like, I just was like, we singing this again? When I was coming up in the Bronx church. But I can't tell you the feeling it gives me now as an adult singing those songs. It's a completely different feeling. It's nostalgia. It reminds me of where I was, what I was doing, or what I wasn't doing back then.
Yeah.
And I think, with that said, the contemporary aspect is something that I think is important, and I think it's valid. I also think that a lot of young people feel like there isn't enough of that.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know if I feel that as it relates to Canaan myself. Maybe, I don't know. But I do think that we need to be open to change. Mm-hmm. There are different people that are in the world, and you have to be a little bit more accepting. I also think that we need to take ego out of the equation. And a lot of church people don't do that. A lot of people don't do that, but a lot of church people don't do that. And I think that's a real issue when it comes to how you approach a young person. You have to be very tender with how stern and strong with them, but you also have to be careful how you approach a young person, because it could be one thing and then they're gone. You don't know what trauma they may have, or you don't know what triggers that they may have. You got to handle with care.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. And I'm guilty of that, just through trial and error, in attempting to approach not just young people, but people in general who don't know me. And I think I have kind of an outgoing personality, but often my sense of humor is like a piercing of a sword into the hearts of some people. And they haven't spoken to me for 14 years for that, what I thought was an icebreaker. So, let me go to the Reverend here, because you, sir, were probably middle school, early high school when I came to Canaan 15 years ago, along with Ashley and Dominique, all you guys. We had the Canaan Mass Choir that I think won the McDonald's thing. That was, we had a huge, I thought, saw it as a huge youth ministry, especially through the choir. We had church school. We had a number of other things going. But God put a calling on your life, and you pursued it what I call the right way. You studied to show yourself approved, to rightly divide the word. You prepared yourself for leadership in the church of the living God, the same one that we're talking about. However, while you and I have talked enough, I see a lot of similarities in the theology that we've been taught, but I've also noticed that there are modes of ministry that are different, methodology, than what I was taught. And I accept that, because when I was in seminary, the old preachers were getting on us about things that we wanted to try, new things we wanted to do. But having listened to this conversation, and I'm speaking to you as a pastor, as a prospective senior pastor, what are you younger pastors, ordained ministers, what do you see on the horizon as to the return or the what do we call that? The reconciliation of the church. And when I refer to that, Neil, I'm thinking of how can we get an intergenerational congregation to work without having to compartmentalize it into that group, this group, that group, where we're actually a body in Christ? I know that was 5 questions in one, but take a shot at it.
Thank you, Pastor. I think as a minister, we have to kind of go back to the foundation of things. One of the things growing up here in this church, and Ashley, she actually formulated this forum called Bridging the Gap some years ago. I don't know if you remember that. And we had it upstairs, and it was for, I think then Ashley saw the vision then and kind of foreseeing the future of where Canaan or any other church would be when it comes to the spirituality and youth and the connection between youth and adults. I think the issue is, even with that, is that I don't think anyone took it as serious as they should have taken it. The idea was that we are young millennials, we're young teens, letting you all know that there's a problem. We see the problem, we want to rectify the problem, and we do nothing about the problem. And so we find ourselves where people just have gone away, gone off. And I think to answer your question is we have to present something different for this generation now. And that is what we did yesterday, is becoming extremely active in the streets. We have so many, the racial divide in this country is ridiculous. And I think it's getting even more worse, and it will probably continue to become more worse, as we live and move forward. But what I've realized too is that you will find more people protesting, or more millennials or young people protesting in the streets than you do in the church.
Okay.
So the idea is, where should the church be?
Yeah.
And as a millennial pastor, and the conversations I've had with my peers and my cohorts, the idea is we have to be where the people are. People have to see us. We have to become visible. If we're not visible to people, they'll never know who we are. They'll never know who Christ is. And some will know who Christ is, but just will never come back. We label so much of being a Baptist and a Catholic and a Presbyterian, and you realize without those labels, so many of those young people are going to those churches that do not even put labels on them.
Sure. Yeah, I know of churches, friends of mine, who took that denominational label off of the marquee for that very reason. But that's a good segue into what you said is a good segue into our next segment, and that has to do with political frustration. Now, I want to tell you, I was very proud to see the street activity over the last year in relation to police brutality, or all kinds of discrimination, whether it be racial, gender issues, environmental concerns. I was really proud to see the volume of young people out there and actually standing their ground and saying, as one of the hymns of the King era was, "I shall not be moved." I mean, in their own language. And I'd like to think that the outcome of the recent election, all that had everything to do with the outpouring of passion among this generation about what was going on in their country. Now, as we go into this part on, and I'm going to make this confession too. One of the things I noticed, Ashley, is your dad is about the only clergy person I ever heard asked to weigh in on what was going on in the world. In the 60s, the foundation, the Center for Social Response to what was going on in the country. I didn't get a single call from a reporter in the last several months, maybe one or two, but the church clearly was not the go-to. But on the news networks that I watched, there were young journalists, young people who have established their own nonprofit organizations to go after injustice, and they were very articulate. They made very clear what the problems as they saw them were, and I'd like to think, with Stacey Abrams and others, the response of the nation had more to do with that, but that the church was kind of standing on the sides. The question is, can it be said that religion has fallen on hard times when it comes to outreach to the hungry, the poor, the socially marginalized? And I'll just give each of you a minute to just comment on that. Has religion fallen on hard times? And let me tether to that, the fastest growing religion in America is no religion at all. So, Neil, don't take too, I got quite a bit I want to go through, so if you'll just kind of take a stab at that.
Yeah, I think part of it is there's just so many things. There's so many distractions for people now as opposed to many years ago. I think there are a lot of people who are disenchanted with organized religion. I know a lot of black people who might be some of the quote-unquote woke folks claim that, well, I shouldn't say claim, they state that, Christianity is rooted in white supremacy. And I see what people are saying as far as that goes. So I think there's so many different reasons. People not being accepted for who they are for whatever reason, marginalized, even sub-marginalized communities that we have. So I think with that said, I think there's so many different things, so many different aspects of life that are in our society now that were not in our society 50 years ago. Like you said, the church was the meeting place where we, so I think it's because there's so many different things and so many different ideas.
Well, social media has put a big dent in that.
Yeah,
no,
and then
no
streaming, why go to church if I can stream at home? You know what I mean? That's what some people say.
Well, they're saying that now.
Well, yeah.
They're saying that to me. I'm not ever coming back. No, I've got Givelify, I've got my stream, I'm good. And I can still eat my Cheerios at the same time. Ashley, what about you?
I agree with Neil, actually. I agree 100% with you. I think that it's a lot of nationalists, a lot of rebels or revolutionaries who feel like, especially a part of the movement, who feel like they have to reject everything. And a part of that system they feel is the church, or they feel Christianity is rooted in white supremacy, so we have to reject that. But I think that's also on our part. As Travis said, we grew up here. Those of us who grew up in that, who believe in Christianity, who believe that Jesus Christ is our Savior, it's on us to stand back and say, actually, this is what we believe, this is what this is, and offer them the option to join us, to teach others about that. You're not going to save everybody. I accept that. But we do have, we have to do our part on our end, but it's not only the church's fault.
Sure.
I can't just blame the church and saying, oh, that's oh, they're just absent. It's not just the church. It's also the response from the outside and from young people who are growing up and learning
Sure.
to reject everything. That's
Sure,
why
I remember when my kids were growing up, people were raising sand about the church, they were raising sand about the schools, and they were raising sand about parents. And I just happened to be at the time all three of those. And, and I said, how much blame do I have to bear for what's going on in the world? And I was able to kind of shuck some of that, even though I knew I had a role, as I think all adults have a role in helping shape the future for young people. Dave, I'm going to skip over you for just a second because I want to go to the church falling on hard times. Now, one thing for sure, during this pandemic, there is no big church, little church. All of us are kind of in a little chair. But, we're all on TV, we're all accessing just masses of people who may just be, turning through their YouTube clips and, let me check this out. Is the church in a problematic place right now?
Yeah, I believe so, Pastor. The church is in a problematic place, but I want to go back to what the original question was, has religion fallen on hard times? Religion will always fall on hard times because people solely rely on religion and not relationship. And so we've pushed so much religion on people that we have not given people the opportunity to have a relationship with God, have a relationship with others, and even with themselves. Even in this moment, you've said it before, this pandemic has forced us to be out of the church, out of the building. The idea is that when do we plan to have these open conversations for people to feel comfortable about being here?
No.
When do we talk to individuals about their sexuality and not make it a taboo situation?
No.
When do we get to a space where we can properly teach people right theology, correct theology, so that way we're not bearing theology based off of what our ancestors have taught us because of their hardships and what was taught to them? When do we get to a space where we can now say we are free from the labels of anything or of what people put on us, and we're actually solely relying on what God has called us to do? And I think those are the questions we really need to identify when identifying where the church has fallen.
Sure.
Because the church is going to always fall if we don't root ourselves in relationship.
I want to make a point on your comments. The when part, at least from the pastor, I would be, for example, as pastor, I would be the convener of the conversation. Can we agree with that? And I feel very strongly right now the when is a very big question because there are certain members of this congregation that I could not have in this circle and have this level of openness. Because I wouldn't be able to, it'd be like a Jerry Springer kind of show, or, you are the father kind of thing. But I think this is a step toward, you're having put it just the way you did, and those who are listening, it is a major step toward a lot of the papers I used to write in college that I didn't really know enough about the subject matter. I would title it, Toward a Theory of Such and That. We weren't there, but I wanted to kind of point out what I thought were the paths to take toward getting to the answers that we needed, yeah.
Pastor, I totally agree. And I think the church has made several steps and initiatives to identify. But I guess the question is, when will we not just continue to identify, when will we actually do the work? And actually start doing the work.
Yeah.
Because we can make as many steps as we want, but it's not until you my aunt would say, put pen to paper or foot to action,
Yeah.
when people will really identify and see what we're really all about.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
If I can offer
Dean.
one, I think one area, and I think this applies to not just the church, but the Black community, and it's that word that you just mentioned. And I just want to just put a little emphasis on that. We, and they, we and they. And I just think that when we're talking about collectively what we need as individuals, which we all have identified from an individual perspective, what is it that we need needs to be more, then the use of the word we indicates someone other than me. Or maybe it does include me. But I think a better question that everyone should ask themselves is, what could I do? I think a lot of the questions that we ask about how do we respond to the things that's going on in our community is always something that's external. You know, it's always like, here's something that we're facing, but where's the answer going to come from? They need to be doing something different. But ultimately, it's impacting me. Like, what's happening in the church impacts me. Like, you know, it impacts Dylan. It impacts Amar. It impacts Ashley. It impacts David. So if we move from asking the question about what are we and they going to do, and we start kind of trying to ask ourselves, you know, at what point, you know, with George Floyd, the response to that in that movement caused us to kind of, you know, it's the same question that we're having today about the church. At what capacity do we have to have a space for people to be who they are, defined in their own self, without judgment, where I can say I'm not happy, and that's, you know, that's what you said, and that's where you are, and so that people could learn to like take responsibility of what they need are, and like look at what can I do about this situation, make it a little bit more personal, and not so much of something on the abstract outside of ourselves.
Can I echo him really fast?
Yeah.
I totally agree with what you said, and I wanted to raise something that basically I think he's bringing up a point about self-reflection and about people being self-accountable. Is I think that a lot of churches lack the humanity. We kind of forget that everyone's trying to be like God or trying to find God, and you end up putting others down or being so pious that you forget that the reason people come to church is because they're not whole. And basically knowing God and understanding God is a part of finding that wholeness. But in the culture and the environment, sometimes you lose that, and we forget that the humans these are our humans, broken humans who need to become whole, and that's what the church is for. Instead of just becoming a certain business or a certain representing something in the community. But also to something that you said about Rev, I think one thing why people call him, and that's just my personal opinion, is sometimes I think some leaders have to do the Sharpton approach. You got to saturate the space that you want to be a part. Sometimes people need to know that Canaan is here. Like Travis said, you got to go outside and you got to call Amsterdam News, you got to call the Daily News, you got to call the Post, you got to call whoever and say, this is what we're doing, you need to cover us. And if you're not covering us, you're going to get a lack of support on your paper, or you're going to have to start doing that.
Okay. Ashley, while you're kind of in a rhythm there, and I want to go to David on the question. While all of this, what we're talking about relevant, we're talking about, a lot of this has social consciousness attached to it, which is very much a part of the teachings of Jesus. I still, and you do too as Christians, still have a responsibility to lead individuals into a relationship with Jesus Christ as Jesus presented himself. Now, fortunately, he did not present himself as a white supremacist. There's no evidence of that at all in the Gospels, but more so as a carpenter's son, a working class young adult, 33, who still had on the clothing of the community where he was raised in Nazareth, poor, and whose words were always directed to lift boats from the bottom that were stuck at the bottom. That's the message of Christ. But we still have that obligation to teach and preach that while addressing these social consciousness issues or these generational issues, generational. So as a preacher, when I come into the pulpit, I'm obligated to bring my Bible with me and say, thus saith the Lord our God.
those things go hand in hand, though. Yeah, I don't think it's one without the other.
Okay.
If the Bible is our instructional tool of life, I think it, as they say, is in there. Like, that's
Yeah.
how I feel. So I think that you will find that in there. I think that's where I go back to that whole nuance thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're not mutually exclusive. I think it's one and the same. So I don't know if maybe if people use that approach when we get biblical, maybe that might be a better approach. But I don't think they're separate.
Well, Martin did it all the time. And he was a genius at taking Nietzsche or Gandhi and Jesus and pulling them together that would cause you to want, all right now, where are we going to go? So he was a master at that. But I don't hear quite the mix of that. Now, I mean, it's a different language. These young people were in those marches. They had a language that spoke specifically to, and it worked. David, there's a survey that reported that political engagement has intensified since 2016 for obvious reasons. A week or two after President Trump was inaugurated, the women of this country had the largest march I ever seen in my life. Where they had the little pink thing on their head, which just overshadowed. That being the case, it is said, this Barna study says that the 2016 election, that political engagement has increasingly spilled into the pews, the church. And I don't know that I've seen that. Further, today's young people are more into social activism, and members of Generation Z and the millennials have stated their frustration about today's church avoiding difficult social and political topics. And that's not ever really been the case, especially Canaan. But yeah, the black church, but this study says, now I do have white colleagues in ministry who don't dare get up and mention anything about social. If they even say social, then that's going to be an issue. But this study says that millennials want the church to say more about social engagement.
You said, Pastor, they want the church to say more engagement.
That millennials and Generation Z would like for the church to be more forthcoming on issues of social activism.
Well, I can say, I said, well, let me know how to phrase this. All right. Social activism, okay, let me say this. All right. We have that here, but it's not, we have things going on here, but I haven't seen something like that big. So my first march was at the National Action Network. I think I was like 20 or 19. I forgot what march that was because I did so many marches. But I want to answer the question, but I can't say, I have to be honest. Here, I don't know where I see social justice, people want to march and get up and rally and, say, stop this or things like that. I'm not saying it like that, but I don't see us going forth, promoting social justice like Walker used to do back in the day. I don't know if it changed. Maybe we need I guess that's where the youth come in, or I guess that's where we go back to being, because to me, I don't.
Okay, I think you're right about that. I think you see much less of it. I thought it was really funny, Reverend, during one of the Canaan Cares events, a caravan of Black Lives Matters marched by the church. Do you remember that? And they were mostly, other ethnic groups, yeah. And, we were kind of on the sidelines, which I thought was really a paradox. And they were just, hey, through Harlem. So I think you have, I think there's some truth to that.
I think it's more the non-denominational churches that you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, if you go, I'll say to Riverside or other ones, you'll see like the Black Lives Matter up in the sanctuary or outside the flag. And a lot of them are active in the community, but it's because I feel like they're not, like you said earlier, they're not really based in community work. They're not
Right.
part of organizations civil rights organizations. So that's their only, I guess, outlet
Yeah.
to do so. But isn't there something in the Bible that says you're not supposed to mix politics?
Well, Sam Proctor, who was once the pastor of Abyssinian Church, says that Jesus, in talking about institutions, was not, says that there has to be a Nathan who will go to the king and unafraid and say, "Thou art the man." You have to be able to go to whoever's oppressing the people and say, "You're the one doing it." It doesn't mean necessarily or unnecessarily that you need to run for office, but you are never exempt from bringing the case to the authorities. That was Proctor's words, and I always agreed with that. And Jesus did that. He walked in, he saw them selling all that stuff in the prayer room, and he cleaned house. I mean, it's episode after episode of Jesus taking on the authorities in the name of a higher moral compass. Yeah.
Pastor, if I may interject here, I think, and we have not seen it in a lot of our churches, especially here in Harlem, but what we are seeing, especially in the South, you have more preachers who are tying in social justice messages into their preaching, into their Bible studies. One thing I try to make sure that I do is incorporate some form of social justice when I preach, because I need people to understand that although we can speak of the spiritual and we can speak of this heavenly God, but the reality is if we don't make God plain here on earth and make God and put God into their problems, people won't understand. It's like we're speaking over them. And so yes, every church has to do a better job at becoming activists, not just in the church, but in the streets. And that means marching. That means supporting other organizations or civil rights organizations like the National Action Network. It means, backing up, people like Reverend Sharpton to make sure that he understands that the church is in support of him. One thing I did in my research, this is actually research from my paper that I'm writing for my dissertation for school, that's already done. And one thing I've learned is that Dr. King and a lot of the other pastors, before marching, they had meetings or classes on how to march and what to do to march. They taught people, inside the church. They brought the people, and some of them weren't even Baptists or Christians, Some were Muslims, some were, Hinduist. The reality is there was a method. Their message did not change, but there was a method that they orchestrated that was different than what others were doing.
Okay. Ashley, were you trying to get in? And then now let me just remind us. I want to look at our producer. I see them wind it up or what? I can't tell with that. Oh, okay. All right, so we got to do, but if you just, snapshot.
It's just real quick. This is my thing. As Travis said before, we can march and all that, but how can you march and stuff if you don't know God? You got to know God first before you could do this. So I understand the marching and all that stuff, but you got to get yourself at whole together first. How I'm going to say Black Lives Matter when I ain't got myself together? You got to get yourself together with God first before I can march. I'm not going outside the march unless I know I'm together, because I can't do that. How I'm going to fight for somebody else, and I got to fight for me first. I got to worry about me.
Okay.
So I can,
I also think there's a part of the social justice movement that requires healing, and I feel like the church should be there for that part. So there's a mental health aspect. There's those who lose their children from gun violence and police brutality. There's a part of that activist doesn't even understand how to relate to that part of the broken soul. I think the church can step in that part as far as that. That's just my personal opinion.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Because you know what? Travis, I'm not sure what Reverend Boyd, what your research has led you to see, but one of the things I found out in writing, doing my doctoral work, was that Jesus, when he referred to healing, was referring more to a holistic healing of a person, not, my arm is hurting and, throw a pint of oil on it, that kind of thing, but rather it was holistic. And we go to that scripture where he asked the man, "Wilt thou be made whole?" Now his problem was he couldn't walk. But Jesus didn't ask him, "Do you want to walk?" He said, "Do you want to be whole?" And I think that goes to wholeness if the conscience and the spirit is sick, then that person is sick. I don't care if every other bodily function is at work. Now, because I'm down to 2 minutes, let's do a quick word association. I'm going to give you a phrase and respond to it quickly. Illegal immigration.
Humanity. Show humanity.
Illegal immigration, Ashley.
Understanding, love.
David, same question.
Compassion.
Reverend?
Love, compassion, but then also unlock them children and these parents out of those cages.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. Dean?
Clear path to citizenship. Making
Clear
people,
path.
making people feel connected,
All right.
more connected.
I wish I could do I don't have time, but I have a follow-up for that. But the cages, kids locked in cages.
The devil.
All right. I don't see anybody marching on that, though, on that issue. Reverend? Okay.
Where's Christ in that?
Say again, please.
Where's Christ in that?
Okay.
Ruthless.
What'd you say? Ruthless.
Inhumane.
Yeah.
Oh, I already got you. All right. Illegal immigration, kids. Oh, no, I didn't get you on. Kids locked in cages.
Deplorable. Unacceptable.
Black Lives Matter.
Profound, and this is the first, I know it's long, it's the first time that there is an organization that is shining the light on police brutality, specifically, and they're young people.
Okay. I got a follow-up for, gosh, I wish we had more time. Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter is not a terrorist organization. Black Lives Matter, say it louder for the people in the back.
Okay. David? Reverend?
Black lives will always matter.
Okay. Dean?
And I say, make it personal. Make it personal.
Make it personal. Make it personal. Global warming.
Real, science is real, God is real, but he allows us to know about science. So, yeah.
One of my mantras is faith and reason can work together.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Learn what you don't know and try to do better.
Global warming. Climate control. Yeah. Can we come back to you, Reverend?
Control your resources.
Okay. You mean globally?
Yeah, globally. What resources are we controlling here?
All right.
It's our planet. We live here. So it's important that we stay aware, stay informed.
Okay. Well, I am plumb out of time, but every minute has been well utilized today on Crosstalk. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. I hope I can get you to come back again because we have a lot of unfinished work that we've started, and I have some follow-up questions, and we had a wonderful time here today. Thank you for tuning in, and look to our website, our Facebook page, check YouTube to find out when our next episode of Canaan Cross Talk will be held. I'm your host, Thomas Johnson. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and may God render his richest blessings upon you until we meet again. Thank you so much.